She was once the voice that made all of America believe love was always gentle, youth was always safe, and sorrow was nothing more than a fleeting moment wrapped inside 3 minutes of music. But behind that clear, innocent sound lay a life marked by violence, control, loss, and repeated brushes with self-destruction. Connie Francis was not just a star. Her life was a place where extraordinary talent and profound suffering coexisted, neither willing to yield. She reached the summit far too early. Hundreds of millions of records sold, countless #1 hits, global adoration. But it all arrived too fast, too forcefully, leaving behind a woman who was rarely given the right to choose her own life. Under the spotlight, she was America's safe symbol. Away from it, she lived in fear, under suffocating family control, and inside a world where freedom was always conditional. A love cut down by bullets before it could fully grow, a body violated and then blamed, a voice that once sustained an entire life suddenly gone, a family pulled into a criminal spiral with no escape. Connie Francis lived through all of it and still walked back onto the stage. Her story is not about perfection. It is the story of a survivor, someone who had to learn how to exist after every layer of protection had been violently stripped away. And it is within those fractures that the true portrait of Connie Francis finally begins to emerge. The truth is, the fractures in Connie Francis's life did not appear after she became famous. They were already there much earlier, before her first recordings, before audiences came to know a safe voice, and before she was old enough to understand how talent itself could become a cage, refined enough to feel invisible. Connie Francis was born on December 12, 1937 in Newark, New Jersey, under the name Concetta Rosa Maria Franconero, into a working-class Italian-American family. Her childhood unfolded between Newark and Brooklyn, in a mixed Italian-Jewish neighborhood where multiple cultures coexisted side by side. Connie grew up surrounded by English, Yiddish, and Hebrew, not as an achievement, but as a natural consequence of her environment. Her father, George Franconero, he worked as a roofer and carried very clear ambitions for his daughter. When he recognized Connie's musical ability, he immediately set her life on a path that allowed no deviation. From the age of 3, Connie was enrolled in music lessons and pushed to play the accordion instead of the piano, a decision she would later acknowledge as having tied her to the image of a child performer far too early. Performances at veterans' hospitals, local festivals, churches, and community events followed one after another, not as experiments but as repeated obligations. Meanwhile, her father's attention was not evenly distributed. When her younger brother, George Jr., was born, the imbalance became unmistakable. Connie remained the center because she had performance value, while the child not linked to music was largely pushed outside the circle of priority. The household functioned according to a logic of achievement, and Connie learned early that affection came with conditions. Outwardly, she appeared to be the ideal child, attending an arts-focused school and graduating from Belleville High School in 1955 with excellent results. But her personal life was tightly controlled. No dating, no autonomy, no room for mistakes. Long before Connie Francis became a star, she had already learned how to live inside other people's expectations. And it was from that foundation that a brilliant yet fragile career began to take shape. The pressure of family expectations and rigid discipline did not end on the small stages of Connie's childhood. As she entered adolescence, the path ahead had already been drawn, and it began with television. In the early 1950s, Connie Francis appeared regularly on StarTime Kids, a children's program where her accordion skills and maturity beyond her years set her apart. Television gave Connie something essential: familiarity with the camera, with live pressure. and with the constant sensation of being evaluated. Soon after, she was invited to appear on Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts, a rare gateway from the American living room into the national entertainment industry. There, the name Concetta Franconero was deemed too difficult to pronounce, and Connie Francis was born, not as an act of self-definition but as a matter of convenience. The name change seemed minor, yet it marked the moment she began separating from her real self to step into an image that was easier to consume. After her television appearances, Connie quietly recorded demos for songwriters, singing not for release, but so her voice could be used to pitch songs to more established performers. Many record labels listened and declined. She was considered too young, insufficiently defined, lacking a clear market. When she finally signed with MGM Records in 1955, it was not the result of a carefully designed strategy, but a convergence of luck, persistence, and timing. Her early years at MGM quickly became a cycle of heavy setbacks. Single after single failed to chart, sales remained modest, and the threat of contract termination loomed constantly. During this period, her earlier aspiration to study medicine, once a serious consideration, was quietly abandoned, not by choice but because there was no longer a way back. As her contract neared its end, Connie was pushed into a decision she herself did not believe in. Her father once again intervened, insisting she record a song from 1923, Who's Sorry Now? The initial release passed almost unnoticed, seemingly confirming her greatest fear, that the career was about to collapse. Then, on January 1st, 1958, the song was suddenly played on American Bandstand. Within weeks, the record sold over 1 million copies, reached #1 in the United Kingdom, and climbed into the top 5 in the United States. The reversal came so fast that Connie barely had time to adjust. From a young artist on the verge of being dropped, she became a national phenomenon overnight. In that turning point, the role of Dick Clark was decisive. More than the man who aired the song, and he became a rare, stabilizing presence in an otherwise indifferent industry, offering Connie a professional relationship that functioned as a form of patronage, something she had never previously experienced. Yet at the same time, this success closed off every other exit. Connie Francis was no longer a young woman allowed to experiment or fail. She had become a brand, required to keep winning, even as the cost began to extend far beyond music itself. After the violent reversal brought by Who's Sorry Now, Connie Francis did not enter the period of stability many assumed would follow. On the contrary, 1959 opened with an acceleration that felt almost breakless. Stupid Cupid arrived and quickly shaped an entirely different Connie Francis, younger, sharper, and far more directly aligned with the exploding teen pop market. The song reached the top 20 in the United States and hit #1 in the United Kingdom, proving she was not a one-hit phenomenon born from Who's Sorry Now, and forcing the industry to recognize her as a new center of gravity for youth culture. Soon after, Lipstick on Your Collar pushed that image even further, playful, confident, and carrying a distinctly female energy that was still rare in late 1950s American pop. At the same time, Connie was pulled into a cycle of constant visibility, national television appearances, major music programs, and a touring schedule so dense that rest became a luxury rather than a necessity. Recording sessions functioned like an assembly line. One song barely had time to settle before the next had to be completed. There was no space to build a long-term artistic identity, no time to process the emotional weight of each release. More than 3 million singles sold in that single year reflected her immense commercial pull, but behind the numbers lay a growing pressure. Connie had to keep winning, and she had to win fast. In 1960, everything intensified further. Everybody's Somebody's Fool went straight to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, followed immediately by My Heart Has a Mind of Its Own. Those back-to-back peaks placed Connie Francis in history as the first female singer ever to top the Billboard chart, a symbolic breakthrough in an industry long dominated by men. Albums sold in the millions, and she became the best-selling female artist in the United States that year. Her expanded contract with MGM was not merely a reward, but a long-term commitment. She was required to record in multiple languages, preparing for a market that extended far beyond American borders. By 1961, Connie's music was no longer confined by language or geography. Where the Boys Are entered the Billboard Top 5, becoming closely associated with an image of American youth searching for freedom and experience. At the same time, Connie entered recording studios to sing in Italian, German, Spanish, and Hebrew, not as a decorative experiment, but as a deliberate strategy to reach each audience in its own language. The fact that her songs could top charts in multiple countries made her a rare example of early 1960s global pop. As cumulative sales approached roughly 20 million records, Connie Francis was no longer simply a teen idol. She had become a cultural phenomenon, even as the relentless pace of her life began eroding private spaces the public never saw. As the American market grew accustomed to Connie Francis as a constant presence, the center of her career quietly shifted beyond U.S. borders. In 1962, albums recorded in German and Italian were no longer treated as secondary releases for expatriates or nostalgic listeners, but rose directly to #1 in multiple European countries. In Germany, Connie became a near-impossible paradox, an American artist outselling domestic performers in a market famously resistant to foreign voices. This success was not built on novelty, but on the way she sang as if those languages were places she genuinely belonged. Extended tours across Europe, South America, and the Middle East followed in rapid succession, each night a different cultural space, a different aesthetic framework, forcing Connie to adapt continuously without permission to slow down. But that diversity did not dilute her identity. Instead, it expanded the range of Connie Francis's existence. Connie Francis Sings Italian Favorites, released earlier, remained on the charts for 81 weeks, quietly demonstrating that pop music did not have to wear a single Anglo-Saxon face. This model soon became a template, an American star singing in multiple languages, conquering markets through their own cultural rhythms. By 1963, Connie still delivered clear hits like Don't Break the Heart That Loves You. But the atmosphere had changed. Youth taste was beginning to tilt toward harder rock, more rebellious imagery, and sharper emotional edges. Meanwhile, Connie carried an immense legacy. More than 53 charting songs recorded in over 15 languages, a figure that spoke less to leisurely glory than to relentless labor. On the surface, she stood atop an international empire with total sales exceeding 200 million records. Beneath it, the pressure to adapt to a world changing faster than her ability to stop and breathe had become unmistakable, a thin fracture running parallel to the expanding brilliance of her fame. By 1964, Connie Francis had not lost her voice, nor had she abandoned the professional discipline that had kept her standing for nearly a decade. But what changed lay outside the recording studio. America itself was tilting in another direction, toward a musical landscape that no longer required polish and no longer prioritized safety. When the Beatles arrived, they brought not only new songs, but a new mode of cultural consumption, younger, louder, and far less patient with what had once defined the mainstream. Connie continued to record, continued to release music, continued to work at the same familiar intensity. Yet her new songs began slipping out of primary radio rotation, not because they lacked quality, but because radio and television were searching for different faces to represent a new generation. Songs that had once made millions of American families pause and listen were quietly moved to less prominent time slots, aimed at audiences who had grown up alongside her. The shift was not dramatic, but it was unmistakable to an artist whose life had long been measured by public response. In 1965, Connie Francis made her final appearance in the top 40. There was no announcement, no formal farewell, just a quiet reality unfolding behind the scenes of the industry. MGM Records began adjusting its strategy. Promotional budgets for Connie were reduced, not because of conflict, but because the label's attention had moved toward names better aligned with emerging trends. For an artist once central to sales figures, the experience of being pushed from the center came not as a sudden fall, but as a gradual absence from long-term planning. From 1966 onward, Connie was no longer positioned as a hitmaker. She appeared more frequently on live stages and television specials, where audiences came for a familiar voice rather than chart rankings. The work continued, but the pressure changed shape. No longer the chase for positions, but the need to find personal reasons to remain on stage when the spotlight no longer pointed fully in her direction. By around 1970, Connie Francis officially exited the competitive space of the charts, not because she had failed, but because the era had chosen a different voice. For the first time after years of living within rhythms dictated by recording schedules, broadcast slots, and sales figures, Connie found herself facing a pause, one in which her career was no longer measured by achievements, but by the question of how, or whether, she wanted to continue. That pause at the beginning of the 1970s had barely taken shape when another crisis arrived, this time unrelated to trends or industry strategy, striking instead at the very core of her profession. In 1971, Connie was forced to undergo vocal cord surgery. It was not a proactive choice, but a compulsory one for someone who had pushed her voice to its limits for nearly 20 years through relentless touring, tightly packed studio schedules, and nights of singing without real recovery. The consequences arrived faster than expected. After the surgery, Connie's voice nearly vanished. This was not a mild hoarseness or a technical decline that could be adjusted, but an inability to control tone, sustain breath, or hold pitch long enough to complete a full recording. The studio, once her most familiar space, suddenly became a profound psychological trial. Sessions ended early, takes were abandoned midway, and she faced a growing sense of helplessness toward the very instrument that had sustained her entire youth. In 1972, Connie returned to the studio with unguarded resolve. The voice did come back, but it was no longer the voice that had conquered global radio. The sound lacked its former depth, tension surfaced with every breath. For record labels, this was the moment when numbers outweighed encouragement. An artist unable to guarantee consistent recording quality represented a commercial risk, especially in a market that had turned away from traditional pop years earlier. What made this period so painful was not simply that Connie temporarily lost her voice, but that she understood with clarity. This was not a brief stumble that could be corrected with a hit single or a new promotional campaign. Her body spoke before the industry did. And for someone who had lived within a pace that never allowed stopping, confronting her own biological limits became a quietly brutal experience, a fracture unfolding internally long after the stage lights had already begun to fade. As music placed Connie Francis in a familiar position within public life, cinema entered as what seemed like a promising detour, but in reality became another test of identity. In 1960, Where the Boys Are emerged not merely as a romantic musical of its time, but as a genuine social phenomenon. The theme song, performed by Connie, quickly saturated radio, while images of college students flooding into Florida inadvertently helped define spring break as a new cultural ritual for American youth. In that moment, Connie was no longer just a voice. She became the symbol of a generation longing for freedom, yet still carefully framed within the safety Hollywood demanded. That success opened further doors. Connie went on to appear in Follow the Boys and Looking for Love, projects built squarely around her existing public image, the famous singer, innocent, approachable, non-disruptive. The roles required little psychological transformation, but demanded emotional energy of another kind. The constant maintenance of consistency, the refusal to stray from the template audiences already recognized. On screen, Connie appeared natural and charming, yet there was always the sense that she was moving across cinema rather than entering deeply into it. What is telling is that even as the films performed well and her name continued to expand in reach, Connie never viewed cinema as an escape or an alternative path. She did not attempt to redefine herself as an actress, nor did she cling to Hollywood as tastes began to shift. Long days on set did not offer her the same sense of control as the recording studio, where the voice, even when injured, remained the most instinctive extension of who she was. Film broadened Connie's visibility, but music remained the axis she held on to, even as that axis began to tremble. After years of struggling with her voice and with market relevance, Connie Francis entered a phase in which her career was no longer driven by ambition or strategy, but by sustained presence within public memory. From 1974 onward, major contracts faded quietly away. No record label was willing to make long-term bets, and no new album carried the momentum to generate large-scale sales. Connie continued to appear, but not as an artist shaping the future. She returned as a familiar figure, invited back to remind audiences of the past. Retrospective television programs, stages devoted to classic hits, and nostalgia-driven appearances gradually replaced studios and charts. There, Connie sang herself again, not out of a desire to live in the past, but because it was the only space that still allowed her voice to be heard without being measured against a harsher present. By the 1980s, the change lay not in the sound, but in how it was remembered. In 1981, Connie's name began to surface regularly in American pop history programs and features, where her old hits were replayed in heavy rotation, not as disposable entertainment, but as elements of a shared cultural memory. Songs once dismissed as teen pop were now placed in a broader context, as markers of an era when female voices could still occupy the center of the industry. The peak of this reassessment arrived in 1984 with the release of her memoir, Who's Sorry Now? The book did not produce a commercial comeback, but it forced critics and audiences alike to reread the entire trajectory through a different lens. No longer a simple sequence of hits, but a career pushed too fast, too early, and made to pay its price in silence. From that point on, Connie Francis was no longer spoken of as a star past her prime, but as a defining case study in how music history once treated female voices that arrived ahead of their time. From the moment Connie Francis began to be viewed as a symbol rather than a contemporary phenomenon, old memories resurfaced in ways that could no longer be avoided. Among them, the first love that shaped the most private core of her emotional life. Connie met Bobby Darin when they were both still very young, standing at the edge of the same dream of fame. Their bond did not begin with glamour, but with shared work. Unfinished songs, long creative debates, hours spent navigating ideas together. That sense of alignment quickly moved beyond music. For Connie, Bobby was not only charismatic and intelligent, he was the first person to see her as a human being separate from the good girl image the industry was imposing on her. The relationship soon became a threat in the eyes of Connie's father, whose control over her life was nearly absolute. And his opposition went beyond words or familiar psychological pressure. It escalated into symbolic violence when Bobby was threatened at gunpoint, a warning that this love would never be permitted to exist. Connie was forced into a choice between personal emotion and family loyalty, a choice she had never been equipped to resist. Siding with her father brought no peace. It left behind a void that stretched across years, embedding itself deeply in how Connie understood her own worth and identity. When Bobby Darin married someone else, the blow did not unfold publicly, but it quietly devastated Connie from within. Diaries from that period record a state of psychological collapse, in which thoughts of self-destruction appeared as a vague escape from pain she could not yet name. The first love ended without ever being allowed to fully exist. No marriage, no children, only a lingering "what if" that followed her for the rest of her life. Years later, after fame, marriages, and even greater tragedies, Connie would finally acknowledge the truth without ornament. Not marrying Bobby Darin was the greatest regret of her life, not because he was necessarily the right choice, but because he was the only choice she was never allowed to make for herself. After the brutal severing of that first love, Connie Francis entered the early 1960s in a state of simultaneous peak fame and emotional emptiness. In 1963, while on an extended engagement in Las Vegas, she met Dick Canellis, an entertainment manager and public relations specialist for major strip hotels. Canellis was not an artist. He neither wrote nor performed, but he understood intimately how fame functioned and how it eroded the people living inside it. The relationship formed quickly, at a time when Connie was exhausted by relentless schedules and the pressure to sustain her image as a teen pop goddess, even as public taste was shifting. To Connie, Canellis represented a different possibility for life, a man who did not compete for the spotlight, who did not live on applause, and who promised a form of stability she had lacked for years. By the end of 1964, after only a brief courtship, Connie chose to marry him, partly as a way to prove to herself that she could step outside the orbit of the stage and live a normal life. The marriage revealed fractures almost immediately. Connie remained stretched between recording sessions, television appearances, touring, and label obligations. Canellis was accustomed to a controlled, orderly, behind-the-scenes existence. And with no children to anchor them and no time to reconcile two opposing rhythms of life, distance widened day by day. Connie carried her familiar sense of isolation even within marriage, while Canellis soon realized he was living alongside a woman far more psychologically complex than he had imagined. Just months after the wedding, the marriage came to an end. In 1965, Connie Francis and Dick Canellis officially divorced, without scandal, without noise, but with consequences that cut quietly and deeply. It was not a public collapse, but a private failure, reinforcing Connie's growing understanding that marriage was not an escape from old wounds, and that safety, even when chosen rationally, could dissolve faster than the most passionate of loves. The brief marriage to Dick Canellis ended with Connie Francis facing a reality more exposed than ever before. She was not merely searching for a husband, but for a psychological refuge, somewhere safe enough to allow herself to be vulnerable. It was during this period, as her career had begun to falter and the stage no longer offered the same sense of rescue, that Connie met Izzy Marion, a man who entered her life from unusually close range, not through spotlights or boardrooms, but through the quiet rituals of grooming and preparation before performances. Izzy came into Connie's life not via parties or meetings, but through intimate backstage moments before she stepped on stage. He saw her remove her makeup, sit silently before the mirror, confronting a reflection no longer buoyed by the applause of her peak years. And his attention was not shaped by admiration, but by steady, unobtrusive care. Precisely what touched Connie's deepest longing, to be loved without having to shine. Affection grew in that context, not explosively, but with quick-rooting certainty, because Connie believed she was finally loving someone who walked beside her after the lights went down, not someone bound to the stage itself. Their decision to marry came in 1971, when Connie was 32. It was not impulsive, but a deliberate attempt to stop, to build a real domestic life. She consciously slowed her work pace, narrowed her schedule, devoted time to the new household, and tried to inhabit the roles of wife and stepmother to Izzy's children. The effort sprang from a deep desire to belong to a stable family, something she had never fully known after rising to fame so early. The gap between their worlds soon became visible. Connie carried psychological fractures accumulated over years of control, public pressure, and unresolved trauma. Izzy, in turn, faced a woman both fragile and complex, difficult to love within the simple rhythms of everyday life. With no shared children to anchor them, the differences did not erupt into dramatic conflict, but quietly gathered into a persistent sense of displacement. Connie realized she was trying to become a different version of herself to preserve the marriage, while Izzy lacked the capacity to enter the darker inner territories she had never been able to resolve. In 1972, their marriage ended after less than a year. There was no scandal, no public dispute, but the separation left Connie with a deep mark. Once again, their family, the thing she desired most, slipped away in silence, reinforcing a sense of personal failure, not as a star, but as a woman who had placed her final hopes in marriage. The breakup with Izzy Marion left Connie Francis in a state of exhaustion and emotional emptiness, without the energy to pursue romance in its conventional sense. Entering 1973, she met Joseph Garzilli, a businessman whose calm, practical demeanor stood in near total contrast to the men who had preceded him. Joseph was not part of the entertainment world, not preoccupied with fame, nor interested in controlling or reshaping Connie. He appeared as level ground, somewhere Connie could stand without being pulled into the vortex of expectation or celebrity. Their relationship developed cautiously rather than passionately. Connie entered love with Joseph as someone long accustomed to loss, choosing trust not for romance, but out of a need for normalcy. Marriage followed later in 1973, carrying the hope that Joseph's stability might compensate for an inner life worn down by years of collision. The early years together offered a rare quietness in Connie's life. No scandals, no public pressure, no struggle for dominance between competing egos. Shortly after the marriage, Connie adopted a baby boy, Joseph Garzilli Jr. The child became her new emotional center, giving Connie an identity beyond that of an artist, the role of a mother. His presence gave her reason to wake each morning, anchoring her to lived reality rather than to the memory of the stage. That small family became one of the few spaces where Connie felt she did not need to perform. Yet the fragile calm was not strong enough to withstand the undercurrents accumulating within her. Long-standing psychological trauma, compounded by professional decline, gradually eroded her ability to sustain emotional connection within marriage. Joseph, patient as he was, faced a woman carrying too many layers of unresolved damage. Distance formed not through betrayal or explosive conflict, but through helplessness. The experience of watching a partner sink deeper into anxiety and instability. The marriage ended in 1978, leaving Connie in a state of psychological collapse more severe than any previous separation. This time, she did not only lose a husband, but faced the threat of losing the sole anchor that had kept her tied to ordinary life. Her adopted son, became the thread holding her steady amid the upheaval, as the marriage to Joseph Garzilli closed as a painful testament. Even stability can fail to save a soul worn down too long by control, trauma, and prolonged loneliness. After separating from Joseph Garzilli in a state of profound physical and emotional exhaustion, Connie Francis entered a far more cautious, almost withdrawn phase of life. She no longer sought intense emotion or grand promises. What she needed then was someone calm enough not to complicate things further, someone far enough from the spotlight not to be pulled into the vortex of fame that had already wounded her. It was in this context, in the early 1980s, that Bob Parkinson appeared, a television producer accustomed to working behind the scenes, familiar with pressure but not dependent on public adoration. The relationship developed slowly, without fireworks. Bob approached Connie with the steadiness of someone used to managing crises, neither curious about her former glory nor intent on fixing her. For Connie, his presence offered a rare sense of safety, no pressure to return to the peak, no demand to prove her worth. After years of living under control, by her father, by record labels, and by audience expectations, being with someone who asked for nothing became a powerful draw. In 1985, Connie chose to formalize her bond with Bob Parkinson. The decision did not stem from passion, but from the belief that stability might heal the fractures that had settled deep within her. Their shared life unfolded quietly, detached from performance schedules and recording studios. There were no shared children, no plans to expand the family. By then, Connie had devoted all of her maternal instinct to her adopted son, Joseph Jr., and no longer had the strength to begin again. That quiet, initially comforting, gradually turned into a distance difficult to define. The problems did not arise from visible conflict, but from Connie's inner world, still unrecovered. Memories of violence, loss, and prolonged psychiatric treatment left her frequently unsteady, while Bob, despite good intentions, could not step fully into that darkness. And his patients met a woman long accustomed to enduring in silence. Within less than a year, by the end of 1986, the relationship ended, as quietly as it had begun. For Connie Francis, the time with Bob Parkinson produced no scandal or public drama, yet it etched a clear realization. Outward calm does not equal inner peace. When that door closed, she did not rush to replace it, but slowly accepted a far harder truth: that some wounds cannot be healed by affection, no matter how sincere the other person may be. That brief attachment closed in silence, but the quiet did not last. On a night in November 1974, during a tour, Connie Francis stopped at a hotel in New York, a space typically considered neutral and temporary, where performers go only to rest between shows. It was there that her life was torn open in a way no success or fame could shield her from. When the door to her room was forced open, Connie was overpowered while completely alone. She was bound, beaten, and brutally assaulted, leaving injuries not only to her body but deeply embedded in her sense of safety and trust. The time spent in that room was not merely physical violence, it was the total collapse of control, the very thing Connie had struggled her entire life to maintain amid lights and pressure. When she was discovered, she was in a state of shock and exhaustion, and with injuries requiring prolonged treatment. The attacker fled and was never identified. The silence of the investigation became a slow, persistent wound, forcing Connie to live with memory absent any clear notion of justice. What drove her deeper into collapse came from within her own family. Her father, who had controlled her life since childhood, responded not with protection or comfort, but with cruel words that imposed shame upon her, as if she bore responsibility for the violence inflicted. That psychological blow severed the last remaining bond Connie still held with him. In a state of violation compounded by judgment, Connie chose to confront the system rather than remain silent. She filed a lawsuit against the hotel chain where the attack occurred, citing severe security failures that had enabled the assault. The case concluded in Connie's favor, resulting in a multi-million-dollar settlement. That money did not become a means of escape from memory. Instead, it was redirected to support organizations aiding victims of violence. Connie's way of placing her pain into a different current, one where it no longer belonged to her alone. What happened in 1974 did not end in that hotel room. Connie Francis's body left the hospital, but her sense of self did not remain intact. In an effort to hold on to what she believed she could still control, she chose medical intervention for her voice, the last element bound tightly to her identity. A nasal surgery, seemingly technical and inconsequential, became the starting point of another chain of loss. Her vocal range was damaged. Notes that once rose effortlessly now felt foreign. Connie tried to record, tried to train, but every attempt at singing forced her to confront a newly drawn boundary within herself. Subsequent surgeries did not bring what she needed. Each return to the operating room carried renewed hope, only to have it drained away when results failed to meet expectations. The voice, once her safest refuge, became forbidden territory. Unable to sing, Connie also lost the ability to define who she was. Depression quickly deepened into full psychological collapse. She was hospitalized for psychiatric treatment under misdiagnoses, subjected to multiple rounds of electroconvulsive therapy. Memory fractured, emotions were flattened, and her sense of existence became so fragile that a single empty night could pull her to the edge of self-destruction. In that darkness, Connie chose silence as a survival strategy. The loss of her voice was concealed even from those closest to her. That when Frank Sinatra invited her to sing Mama at a memorial for his mother, an offer rooted as much in personal trust as professional respect, Connie was forced to decline. There was no adequate explanation, no confession, only a heavy absence between two people who had once shared deep, mutual understanding. To speak the truth would have meant admitting that the most vital part of her no longer functioned as before, and Connie was not yet ready to face that reality. By the late 1970s, recovery came slowly, almost quietly. The voice did not return as it once had, but it returned enough for Connie to enter the studio in a different way. Disco recordings were made not to chase trends, but to find a new structure for a changed voice. Multilingual recording continued, not as market conquest, but as a way to maintain steady breathing with music. When Connie appeared on a commemorative episode of American Bandstand, the location overlapped with the city where she had been assaulted years earlier. Standing on that stage did not produce triumph, but it marked a direct confrontation with memory, without avoidance, without display. In 1984, Connie placed her story onto the page. Her memoir, Who's Sorry Now, was not written to justify or embellish the past, but to reorder a life that had remained disjointed for too long. The book was widely received, not for sensational revelations, but for the rare candor of someone who had lived too long under public scrutiny. Telling the story did not restore what had been lost, but it gave Connie another way to exist alongside it, without needing to sing loudly, without proving anything, simply continuing in a form that caused less harm. Connie Francis's later years did not dissolve into silence or pure nostalgia. As the stage ceased to be central, she redirected her energy elsewhere, toward spaces with fewer lights and more direct engagement with social reality. She publicly adopted conservative political positions, avoided softening her statements to preserve image, and did not retreat from debate. Silence had once been a survival strategy. Speaking out at this stage became a form of autonomy. Alongside this, she devoted herself to advocacy for victims of violence and for mental health, fields she understood not through theory, but through lived experience. She appeared in campaigns and hearings not as a symbolic figure, but as someone who had endured enough pain to know what required protection. Her private life eventually stabilized in a markedly different way. In her final long-term relationship with Tony Ferretti did not resemble passionate romance or salvational hope. It was steady presence, without demands that Connie return to stardom or shrink herself to fit another mold. With Ferretti, Connie found a slower rhythm, where companionship mattered more than promises, and staying carried more weight than declarations. In 2017, Connie reopened memory with a second memoir, Among My Souvenirs. This time, the writing went deeper into psychological shadows, no longer avoiding exhaustion, anger, or disappointment long suppressed. Writing was no longer an explanation to the public, but a late conversation with herself, direct, unsoftened, unwilling to comfort difficult truths. 1 year later, Connie officially announced her retirement, closing a decades-long relationship with the stage decisively, without drama. In July 2025, she was hospitalized in Florida after enduring days of severe pain related to a long-standing pelvic injury and accumulated physical complications. There was no public spectacle, no prepared statements. News of her passing at age 87 spread quietly, then rapidly. As often happens when a voice has been present for so long, it feels permanent. Connie Francis's legacy cannot be reduced to sales figures or chart positions, though they remain vast enough to demand reconsideration by any generation. What endures more deeply is the imprint of a woman who opened space for female voices in American pop before the language of empowerment became common. Connie was the first to prove that a female singer could top the charts, dominate international markets, sing in multiple languages without losing identity. She was also living evidence of the cost of success that arrived too early and too intensely within a system that lacked any concept of protecting an artist's inner life. After her passing, the music continues on its own terms. Old songs are replayed not only by those who grew up with them, but by younger listeners discovering her voice through digital platforms, detached from its original historical moment. This places Connie Francis in a singular state, both collective memory and new discovery. That legacy needs no further explanation. It exists in the fact that a voice once forced into silence, once pushed outside the spotlight, continues to be heard. Not out of pity, not out of nostalgia, but because it still reaches human emotion at any moment in time. Connie Francis sang of love, separation, and youth in a voice that sounded gentle, even as her own life was repeatedly torn apart by violence, loss, and prolonged silence. A woman who rose from tragedy to global prominence was later abandoned by her era, and yet departed with an undeniable legacy, songs that became shared memory across generations. What keeps Connie Francis alive is not the tragedy she endured, but the melodies she left behind. Do you remember the first time you heard Who's Sorry Now, Stupid Cupid, or Pretty Little Baby? Share that memory in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue preserving the stories behind the voices that once made the world fall silent.